A $500 screen was glowing, and the man watching it never noticed the bent rod 50 yards away. Beside him, an older fisherman worked faded line through scarred guides and quietly swung another largemouth aboard. His only depth tool was a homemade marker, painted orange and chipped from years of bouncing around. Electronics can show arches, contours, and cover faster than anything we carried when I started fishing, but a screen cannot choose your casting angle, control your drift, or make a plastic worm fall naturally. That old fellow understood exactly where the base waited and how his bait needed to enter their kitchen. I have used the same free positioning habit to catch fish directly behind boats loaded with premium electronics. So what did he read in that water that the bright display never put into practice? I'm Jim Callahan, though most reservoir regulars have called me Big Jim for longer than I remember. I've chased largemouth bass for over 40 years, mostly around creek arms, flooded timber, clay, and riprap. 5 Regional Angler of the Year titles and a local tournament Hall of Fame plaque sound respectable. But I have also earned 40 years of mistakes, including several that older anglers corrected with simpler tackle. These 7 tricks cover measuring depth, reading shorelines, preserving positions, rigging simply, and presenting baits without unnecessary expense. They are not arguments against technology. They are foundations technology cannot supply whenever an angler's judgment goes missing. Most of my best lessons began when somebody with uglier tackle caught bass from water I had dismissed. The first lesson uses pocket change tackle, yet reveals casting targets that broad sonar pictures often blur. Trick number 1 is sounding the bottom before you ever decide which lure deserves the first cast. Slide an adjustable stop onto your line, followed by a bead, sliding float, and an inexpensive weight. Cast beyond the suspected cover, let the weight settle completely, then feed line until your float surfaces. The distance to your stop gives the depth, but one measurement only tells a small part. Repeat from several angles, and shelves, channel lips, stump edges, and sudden drops begin taking shape. A dragging weight also telegraphs gravel, shell, clay, or mud through changes you can feel by hand. I still spend 10 careful minutes measuring places where my younger self would have started casting immediately. Scattered fish look promising, but a 2-foot feeding edge gives you somewhere precise to place a bait. Years ago, I stopped on a reservoir point where my electronics painted bass across a broad patch of water. Nothing on that picture told me which part of the point deserved the boat's best casting angle. My marker uncovered a narrow shelf holding 8 feet, then plunging into 16 beside one isolated stump. I parked beyond the break and crawled a Texas-rigged worm along the shelf instead of crossing it. Several largemouth came from that same little lane, while better-equipped boats kept drifting over the whole area. They knew fish were present, but their casts seldom followed the narrow route those bass could ambush from. The valuable discovery was never simply 8 feet. It was where 8 suddenly surrendered to 16. Better yet, the shoreline had already offered clues about that hidden shape before my marker confirmed everything. Trick number 2 is reading the visible bank as the unfinished top of everything continuing beneath your boat. A steep wall of broken rock usually keeps falling sharply after the water hides its lower face. A wide clay shoreline more often stretches outward gently, forming flats before eventually reaching deeper water. Erosion cuts suggest drains, while exposed roots can betray undercut edges, washouts, and firmer holding places. Watch where fist-sized rock changes to gravel, because that seam may continue well beyond the visible bank. Old fence lines often cross flooded farms, and points opposite creek bends frequently indicate channel pressure nearby. I learned to notice those details after wasting afternoons fishing pretty banks that had nothing useful downstairs. Looking sees scenery, reading predicts ledges, channels, ditches, and hard transitions before your first measuring cast. Put 2 neighboring banks side by side, then ask which underwater shape fits the conditions bass face now. After a cold front, I favor steeper rock where fish can slide deeper without traveling far sideways. That short vertical move saves energy and keeps a largemouth close to crawfish, shade, and secure water. During stable spring weather, gradual clay flats leading toward protected spawning pockets deserve a careful inspection. The best flats usually include a drainage ditch giving fish a nearby route between shallow and deep water. One March, that little distinction rescued me after I stubbornly pounded the wrong sunny bank until lunch. Bank reading never guarantees base, but it quickly narrows choices according to season, weather, and available escape depth. Finding the right ledge still means nothing, however, if you cannot return to its productive corner precisely. Trick number 3 builds a waypoint without electricity, subscriptions, updates, or another gadget hanging near your steering wheel. From your fishing position, align a nearby object with a distinct, more distant landmark directly behind it. Then turn roughly 90 degrees and create another alignment using two stable objects on that shoreline. Your stump, rock pile, roadbed, or channel corner sits where those two imaginary sight lines intersect. Approach slowly until both pairs line up again, then adjust for wind and your intended casting direction. Water towers, bridge columns, ridgeline notches, utility cuts, and steeples usually outlast docks or individual trees. I write every alignment down because memory becomes remarkably creative after winter, especially mine after tournament season. And remember, locating the cover means little if your approach forces the lure across it from behind. I once marked a submerged roadbed with a church steeple, red barn roof, and split sycamore tree. Those references put my boat over one broken shoulder where the road crossed an old creek channel. Years later, the barn had vanished, apparently proving buildings maintain about the same schedule as tournament sponsors. My written description and remaining alignments still brought me within one cast of that roadbed sweet spot. Electronics find cover quickly, but staring downward steals attention from wind, drift, shoreline alignment, and casting angle. Knowing a stump exists is different from positioning where your bait travels naturally along its best side. Tell me below whether you still triangulate and which strange shoreline reference has remained dependable for you. My embarrassing lesson came afterward when perfect location failed because I tried feeling every twitch through tight line. Those first 3 habits form a sequence. Measure the depth, interpret the terrain, then preserve your exact position. They may slow your opening minutes, but they prevent hours of wandering casts and careless repeated passes. I would rather understand one small corner thoroughly than fish 50 attractive places without a working reason. Yet location solves only half the puzzle, especially after tournament boats have pressured every obvious piece of cover. A bass can sit beside your worm and refuse it because your hands make that bait behave unnaturally. For years, I believed constant contact improved bite detection, so I kept every presentation tight and controlled. An older partner finally showed me that my careful control was dragging worms away from the fish. The next trick begins with moving a bait almost nowhere, and that is exactly why stubborn bass eat it. Trick number 4 is stitching the worm, moving a Texas-rigged or lightly weighted plastic mere inches at a time. Rest the rod across one hand, almost like you are balancing an old cane across a porch rail. With your free fingers, pull short lengths of line instead of continuously cranking the reel handle. That tiny movement lets the worm breathe beside deep timber, ledges, stumps, branches, and brush piles. I sometimes leave it beside one promising limb longer than my younger self could tolerate without fidgeting. The question is simple. Does covering water matter when a largemouth will move only 3 inches to eat? Fast retrieves cross plenty of empty territory while stitching concentrates your time inside the actual dining room. I nearly abandoned that lesson during one miserable summer tournament when patience felt more expensive than any electronics. My partner kept firing casts around deep timber while I slowly stitched one worm beside a crooked branch. After 20 fruitless minutes, I started feeling foolish and reached for the reel to make another cast. Something stopped me, perhaps stubbornness, although my wife would tell you that supply is never run short. Then the line eased sideways, and the tournament's deciding largemouth loaded the rod without any violent strike. But here is the surprise. My hands had barely made that worm move during the entire pause. Water pressure and soft plastic flexibility produced a faint, believable motion that aggressive rod work would have spoiled. My partner covered more water, but I occupied the only few inches where that particular base would bite. Unfortunately, my next mistake reversed the problem completely because I maintained too much contact, fearing a missed strike. Trick number 5 is allowing controlled slack instead of keeping your line stretched tight throughout every fall. Anglers crave constant tension because feeling the lure seems safer than trusting something they cannot directly monitor. But what if that reassuring tension is actually pulling your bait away from the fish beneath it? A tight line swings falling plastic forward, especially after clearing branches, dock posts, stumps, or weed edges. Feed monitored slack there, letting the lure descend more vertically beside the cover rather than penduluming outward. Watch for a twitch, sideways travel, sudden straightening, or stopping earlier than the expected depth indicates. Controlled slack never means abandoned line. Remain ready to reel down quickly and drive the hook home. How many contacts called rocks or bottom were really bass quietly carrying your worm toward the boat? I once believed every largemouth should announce itself with a thump strong enough to rattle my wristwatch. An older partner finally noticed my line sliding sideways while I sat there waiting to feel something impressive. He calmly said, "Jim, that bottom of yours appears to be swimming toward the boat." I reeled down, set hard, and discovered a base had carried the worm several feet without telegraphing vibration. Afterward, I learned each bait's expected fall time and watched suspicious interruptions rather than awaiting dramatic signals. Premium rod sensitivity certainly helps, but attentive eyes often recognize a strike before vibration reaches an excellent blank. That admission bruised my pride, although losing base all afternoon had already tenderized it considerably. Another avoidable mistake came next, making an accurate cast so accurate that it landed directly upon the fish. Trick number 6 is casting beyond the target, then quietly guiding your bait into the strike zone. Dropping directly onto stumps or shallow laydowns can alert pressured base, particularly during calm, clear weekend conditions. Land past the cover, wait for the entry ripples to disappear, then ease the lure naturally forward. The fish encounters something creeping toward safety instead of a sinker crashing through its ceiling without warning. Around docks, place your cast near the shadow edge and pull the bait softly into darkness whenever possible. I have watched shallow base flare away from direct splashes, then return when a quieter presentation approached sideways. Before blaming color or scent, consider whether the lure's noisy arrival prevented any honest inspection whatsoever. Quiet entry begins with casting angle, but suitable weight and sinker behavior complete the deception around specific cover. When wind and depth permit, I favor 1/8 ounce or 3/16 ounce Texas rigs around shallow cover. Those lighter packages enter gently, fall slowly, and remain easier to guide without battering every branch encountered. Add a small rubber stop when entering tangled limbs, keeping the sinker and worm together through cover. A fixed weight leads the entire rig through branches instead of leaving plastic draped behind like laundry. Around open rock, I usually leave the sinker sliding so separation develops naturally during the pause. The weight can settle ahead while the worm glides behind. Something impatient baits sometimes find wonderfully easy. Naturally, I have carried enough unnecessary tackle to lower a boat's waterline while ignoring these two adjustments. My final trick matters more than electronics, boxes of lure colors, and even memorizing somebody's favorite fishing spot. Trick number 7 is keeping a simple weather and water notebook and filling it out while details remain fresh. Record reservoir level, approximate temperature in Fahrenheit, wind direction, cloud cover, clarity, and productive depth in feet. Add the cover type and presentation, including whether the bait fell vertically, paused, stitched, or moved quickly. Individual locations change, but combinations of weather, visibility, water movement, depth, and cover return surprisingly often. A pattern discovered on one reservoir can guide decisions elsewhere, even when the productive structure looks completely different. Paper works better for me than complicated applications because a useful record must remain easy enough to maintain. My notebooks contain coffee stains, crooked handwriting, and several entries apparently written during rough water earthquakes. One battered page, recorded 11 years earlier, eventually pointed me toward a tournament-winning decision on unfamiliar structure. That event brought stained water, steady wind, a falling reservoir level, and largemouth holding along outside grass. The combination felt familiar, although the lake section itself had never produced anything memorable for me before. During lunch, I opened my notebook and found those same conditions documented 11 years earlier elsewhere. That old entry recommended the outside grass edge, slower presentation, and slightly deeper water beside the windblown flat. I followed the pattern rather than revisiting the original spot, and the resulting limit won the regional event. Experience becomes valuable only when observations survive long enough to be compared, tested, and applied under returning conditions. Which old-fashioned technique has honestly outperformed newer equipment for you, and what specific situation proved it? Share that example below, because somebody else's overlooked habit may become another angler's 11-year notebook entry. Expensive electronics save time and provide remarkable information, but they cannot supply patience, positioning, observation, or natural presentation. The real advantage is not owning less equipment, it is understanding which decisions equipment cannot make for you. I still picture that older fisherman reading ripples, shoreline angles, and drifting line while neighboring screens glowed brightly. He was not rejecting technology or fishing through nostalgia. He was applying judgment before asking machinery for confirmation. That judgment explains why Simple Tackle sometimes catches largemouth directly behind boats carrying several $1,000s of electronics. Next time, we will examine why bass abandon apparently perfect cover and where they commonly reposition afterward. If practical, field-tested lessons help your fishing, like this video and subscribe to the channel for more. When a screen shows fish but nobody catches them, the missing detail is usually how the angler approaches them.